Tuning in with KrASIA, bringing human stories to life. Welcome to another episode of Tuning In. I'm your host, Emily Feng. Today, I'm super excited to have Gail Wong with us. She is the managing partner at Her Capital. She has advised businesses on finance, strategy, talent, and peak performance since 2001. Gail has invested in 8 startups over 7 years, with the last 3 as co-founder of the Ladies Investment Club and CEO Evangelist, focused on impact and gender lens. She's generated thought leadership on new investment paradigms, engaged women investors with their money, and analyzed hundreds of visionary female-led businesses. Hey Gail, how are you?
Hi Emily, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. I think there are a lot of things that I just wanted to discuss with you today. So your journey into venture capital is anything but conventional. I really think it's an incredible journey from Wall Street to founding Ladies Investment Club, being a coach. I also saw that you were a TEDx speaker, and you're also a managing partner, and you've done so much. One thing that I wanted to discuss with you is talk about the beginning of your career, which is your career on Wall Street. And so discuss the earlier stages of how you developed from someone who worked on Wall Street into this incredible woman that you are today.
Well, I feel like I'm still on a journey. I think we all are, right, till the end. But yeah, I'm happy to share kind of the bumps and the turns along the way. So let me just start from how I got into banking. I grew up kind of with a strength in math and science, but also language. But I was always pushed towards finance. Asian parents, right? So I was very clear going into Wharton, coming out of Wharton, that that's where I was headed. And the attraction, I think, of working at Morgan Stanley was really about excellence. So here I was, this naive 21-year-old, and you think I've just spent my whole life excelling academically, and I thought I would just excel professionally, and that's life. And I guess it was a lot about excellence, and being around really high-performing people. And I loved learning about deals and being able to work alongside the best in the industry and serving really high-profile leaders. I think there was also, I discovered there was a dark side to the excellence. To be frank, very early on in my first year, I could see that there was a whole system of really smart and accomplished people, but being assholes. Yeah. Okay. It's a really cutthroat environment, right? The competition between firms, and that trickles down to the competition between MDs and even between colleagues at the most junior levels. And I was always trying to marry the two. How do you, always strive to be your best, and that's supposed to forward something for humanity and the world, and at the same time be disconnected from being a human being and going about life in a really sort of extractive and me first and, I don't care about anyone else type of paradigm. Of course, I didn't have the words for all this then. I was just part of the system. I did some of these things myself, learning behaviors that later, after leaving banking and in the last few years, I've been unlearning, right? But I did notice that that system has certain kinds of winners. And of course, I worked in 3 continents, so there were cultural overlays as well. But I think in the Western countries, the winners were white men. I was sort of one of the 5 women/non-white people in my team of 50. Right?
Oh, wow. And
then I think in Asia, it's a bit more diverse, but there's still kind of a clear position of who's privileged and who's in the quote-unquote power.
Yeah.
So I was very sensitized or aware of this, and I think as an associate, I was already pushing for diversity, and I was like, why aren't there more women and more interesting-looking people around, right? Yeah. Do we all just want to play golf and go to strip clubs?
Oh, no.
Yeah. So I was very active in hiring women, and I kind of thought that if we just hired more women and diverse people, the problem would fix itself because they would be excellent and they would rise up and, in a generation, this would not exist at all. But I think also the nuances and the forces at work. There's a system, there are certain expectations about how women need to behave. So if you were hard work and you were a big producer, you also had to be nice. I've heard things said about female MDs who were superstars from a producer standpoint, but people write them because they were not nice. And on the other hand, it's totally normal for a male MD to leave a voicemail of obscenities at their analyst. So there are double standards. And I think what it takes to move up, it's not just excellence. So it's something I noticed and something I experienced myself. It's not just about putting in the work and doing great work. There is a relationship bit to it. You have to kind of cultivate champions and allies, and the tools to do that for a woman, if you don't like sports, you have to find other ways.
Talk money.
Yeah. Well, you have to find other ways outside of work to connect as a person to the people that you want to cultivate as champions and allies. And yeah, so as a woman, I learned all these lessons, talk in a low voice, like all these subtle things to the major things. But then it's like, well, why do women have to go out of their way to do that, right? And that kind of sparked, I guess it's a very fundamental sense of fairness or injustice that I've always seen. And I think when I became a parent, first to a daughter and then to a son, and I think about the world they would go into, that sort of deepened a lot more. So I would say, yes, I've had a career in finance, but I've always also been very keenly attuned to what it means to be an outsider and why it's important to bring outsiders who are outsiders for different reasons into the mainstream, right? And to benefit the world, which is 51% women and is made up of a lot more cultures than one or two prevailing ones.
I completely agree on that sense. I'm curious to know, too, so when you were on Wall Street, right, and you mentioned that you were one of the few women on your team, what issues did you run into trying to be someone, you know, as a woman? Like, even for me, when I used to work in, like, B2B software, I was also the only woman on my team. And, you know, I had to have a more aggressive personality, but then also be, you know, quiet when I should be or things like that. So I'm curious to know, like, how you were able to navigate that in the beginning of your career as well.
In a very conflicted way.
Yeah.
I'm naturally not a marketer or to talk about myself. I suppose that's why I coach very naturally. I'm more of a listener and an observer. So I think that is another kind of back foot position that I started on. And even I think in my third year, so as a senior analyst before I was promoted, I got the feedback that I have really great ideas. I do the work. People know that my work and analysis and whatever I produce is rock solid. But why am I not using that to find a position in a conversation and to leave an impression with clients in a meeting? So I think that's one kind of personal attribute, or perhaps I think women tend to also measure themselves quite critically so they don't speak up till they know for sure what the answer is or that they've got the best answer. And I think there's some cultural expectations or marked down. So you promote a woman, even if people don't say it, you would be saying, is she going to get married? Is she going to have kids? I think in Asia it's a little less exclusionary because of the social structures. Perhaps it's a little more common for women to work, even as parents. But in the States, I found it baffling, frankly, until I actually became a parent and I understood the responsibility of it. But I found it totally baffling that people were asking me, oh, you're getting married. And I was like a mid-level associate. And I asked for a transfer to Boston. But those senior women would be telling me, like, whatever you do, don't go on the operational COO track. You're on the track to be MD. Like, don't do all these things that are going to position you as not a frontliner. So there's a lot of paranoia or awareness that are being sort of pigeonholed or being put on the mommy track that was baffling to me early in my career.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think when you become a mother, it's something that you're proud of and you shouldn't have to hide it amongst your like colleagues. But the fact that there's even something called like the mommy track, it just seems like so unfair. Like I feel like if it was a man who became a father, they'd be like, oh, congratulations, and then continue on your way. But I think as a woman, it's very different.
Well, if I'm to speak candidly, there is a system in the world that bubble, right, of competition. It's completely counter to caregiving. It's a whole different way of being. You got to sharpen your knife and put on your suit and put on your game face and go into work. I suppose women have to wrestle with that conflict a lot more than in a construct where the father is the breadwinner and there's an agreement of a division of roles and he doesn't have to put on this hat and put on that hat 3-4 times a day. Mm-hmm. So there's a reason why that so-called mommy tribe exists, although that phrase is quite derogatory. Yeah. And it is seen as inferior, right? I think that's the real problem. I think corporations really do need to make life work for all their employees and find roles and structures that support that. And I'm sure there are dads who want to do that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, we can talk about how challenging it is for women. I think there's also very little flexibility for expectations around men. And it's both two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. In my opinion, I feel like if you want to be a caregiver, mother or father, it's equally just as hard. There's no social norms that we must follow. So I agree with you on that point. I'm also curious to know, too, so at work, what, stereotypes did you have to break? I also assume, first of all, you are, an Asian woman, so minority of the minorities. Just curious to know what type of stereotypes did you have to break, and were there situations that, you felt uncomfortable doing, but it was part of being able to break that stereotype, whether it's speaking out more or being a little bit more bold. I'm curious to know how you were able to transition.
Well, looking back, I kind of played into the stereotype. Mm-hmm. So, as I said, I rotated around. So I came from Asia into New York as an associate. So there was already this Asian identity. Mm-hmm. And as I said, I was never the loudest voice in the room or the one who talked the most. And then I decided to be a diversity champion. So it was sort of, in a way, looking back, for me, that was something I had to do that was important, a way to lead, because you can only lead with your own self-expression and you have to kind of take some risks or be a little different to lead. Otherwise, you're just kind of one of everyone. Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't do all that intentionally to stand out, but I just did what I felt was important. But if you talk about stereotypes, I kind of ticked every one of those boxes. I think I do have, I suppose, things I might do differently from before, right? I think there was something I'm really passionate about passing on and having families inculcate with their kids early on is this idea of self-regulation and working with our inner dialogue, working with our imposter syndrome, being able to just even recognize when it's at work, because it's a very powerful voice, especially for type A folks. Yeah. With competency handicap. It helps you excel, but it also kind of keeps you very small. Mm. So I'm always curious, if I had a different relationship with that earlier on in my life, how could I have been different? And just really be fearless in meetings, not take myself so seriously, not worry if what I said in the meeting sounded dumb, people probably didn't remember it. I think there was a funny contradiction. So on one hand, I totally set my terms. Mm-hmm. I went into Morgan Stanley knowing I want to have an international career. Mm-hmm. At some point, I want to work in the large global market. So I asked to work in London first, and then to Singapore. Mm-hmm. And then I asked to move to New York, even though people were grooming me to stay on in Asia. Mm-hmm. And then I asked to move to Boston. And I switched from financial services to technology coverage, which is quite drastic. Mm-hmm. I asked for all those things without even second guessing. Are you worthy to ask? Should you ask? Who has asked for this before? Mm-hmm. But then when it came time to negotiate my exit, I was the classic, should I even negotiate? Maybe I can be okay with whatever I'm offered, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm really grateful to a male colleague of mine. We grew up together in the bullpen. And I was like, well, what do you think? And he's like, this is totally insulting. He just had a completely different take and advice in terms of what I could do that blew my mind. It was not even in the realm of possible. Mm-hmm. So I think asking, knowing your worth, you won't know if you get it till you ask, is something I would have loved to do more of. Mm-hmm. It's a flip side, I think, of the imposter syndrome, right? Because if you don't feel like you're worthy or you aren't deserving, how can you ask?
Yeah, I think asking is a very powerful thing. For you, you've been able to work in all these exciting markets by simply just asking. And then because you are valuable to them, they're able to send you off to the company. But it's also something I'm learning as well, because if you never ask, you'll never know. It's just a straight no. So, yes, I completely feel what you're saying, and that's something I'm also struggling as well. I'm also curious to dig deeper into the learnings you've taken away from your early career and how you're now helping and teaching other women through the work that you're doing at this moment. I'm pretty sure there's a lot to cover on this question, but maybe you can speak on a particular project you're working on, or maybe one certain initiative.
Well, I just launched an investment fund for capital to back female founders. Mm-hmm. And that, I suppose, is the full circle of my banking career, as well as how I've supported female leaders in different capacities as a professional coach, mm-hmm. and then tying that into risk-taking. What we discussed earlier about mm-hmm. stepping up and asking is risk. And when it comes to fundraising for a startup, especially for a female founder, it is also about navigating that dimension powerfully. So the fund is a seed stage fund investing in female founders and businesses that have women at their core. So we are fundamentally about supporting diverse innovation. And we see that the world can benefit, economies can benefit, people, you and me, benefit from diverse leadership and technology that is innovated from diverse perspective. And there's so many examples today even where technology falls short for the population or is never designed for women in mind. So that patriarchy is strong in different realms. And I saw all that, how it's strong in finance and in politics, and also in innovation.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would maybe like to narrow down to is the learnings that you've accumulated working on Wall Street and co-founding all these great programs. What are, I guess, the transferable lessons that you want to share with women entrepreneurs that you're helping at this moment?
Well, we've been talking a lot about kind of finance and systems mm-hmm. and these big things that happen out there. Yeah. But I have to say that all comes from the level of the individual. So I had my own personal transformation or journey in terms of looking at where I should be by society's standards yeah. and where I'm really meant to be. And there's this concept of Ikigai. Ikigai is a Japanese word, but there's basically 3 intersecting circles of what you're good at, what you can make money at, and what brings you joy or deep fulfillment. Mm. So I spent my first 20-ish, 30 years even just doing what was expected of me, and that checked 2 of the 3 boxes, and sometimes a third. But I really had a deep inquiry into, well, what am I doing the rest of my life? I'm just making a lot of money, or, there's got to be a bigger picture to this. And I find that a lot of female founders tend to be passionate, so they tend to come from that purposeful lens as it is. Mm-hmm. And that's something I've always admired as a banker or as someone on the sidelines. I've always admired someone who managed to make a business work that was sparked by a passion. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a journey there in terms of integrating those pieces and also integrating that with risk. So anytime there's a big leap of faith, there is a big leap of risk as well. Yeah. Financially, but also kind of reputationally. Yeah. And I would say as a leader, we always have to find a way to belong to yourself first. You can get all the counsel and the advice and the key team members to complement you. But if there isn't a strong, stable core within that guides the vision of a business or that guides what you feel is important, then I suppose you can call it the soul of the business in a way. So yes, total kind of a very different realm from the hard finance that we've been talking about. But I do think that that's the X factor to a great business plan, a great financial model, a great growth hacking strategy. It's in service of something, and that this is the glue. Then I think rippling outwards, it's a lot of work to just maintain one's sense of self and leadership. And as a CEO, there's a million things to do. So that tends to just evaporate really quickly. So I think the immediate circle, the team around is super important. That might sound really generic, but I think building a team at the level of trust as opposed to competencies alone, or even dangling a paycheck or stock options, right, is another lesson that I have learned personally. It's not just about people who do really great work and we can get there. I've experienced sort of great leaders who really take the time to relate to you as a person, and it's relationship first rather than results first. Mm-hmm. Well, and this is one thing that I unlearned, especially in startups where you can incentivize people with money. And maybe startups are like this far out dream, right? But the ability to connect deeply with a team member or anyone you bring on goes miles to having them perform well and, of course, add to the business. And that's one of the pieces that we want to nurture in the way we do EC and Herd Capital. We say it's gender responsive, but really it's just relating to someone as a person first. They do their best work, and that's how we produce sustainably and maximally over the long term. I have myself motivated people through fear, and I've been motivated through fear in the short term, but that just crumbles the human spirit and also doesn't create a motivated employee, right?
I think it's something that people don't think of enough, to be honest. I feel like a lot of people, when they are an entrepreneur or they have a company, all they care is like results. It's all transactional. They just want a product to be delivered, and they tend to forget about like the relationship building or the human spirit and things like that. So
yeah, results are important. We've been so trained, conditioned to get short-term results without taking into account the other costs. I mean, if you just zoom out to this whole idea of sustainability, if we've been benchmarking our companies by the amount of money they make, but until we had carbon credits, and that's still being adopted and integrated, and other ways of measuring impact outside of dollars, I totally understand, how we got to where we are today, because the motivations were set up a certain way. But obviously, I'm not interested in creating or adding to that kind of world when I think about my children or whatever little contribution I would leave behind.
Yeah, I think that's great. So adding contribution to the parts outside of money.
I mean, we may not see results this quarter, but I think we, humanity, is going to be bearing the cost 20 years out. So there needs to be a reconciliation between the short and the long term, because if we want to talk about results, right?
My second to last question would be about how has your personal experiences led you to create a better gender lens for women entrepreneurs through Herd Capital?
We've sort of talked about that in different ways. I think my personal experiences of sort of being an outsider or being able to observe what attracts money or what has attracted money or what money typically looks for really has shaped how we want to approach things at Herd Capital. So in investment selection, innovations for women are poorly understood. No surprise. If you have 70% of firms with no female decision maker, how are they going to understand femtech? Or how would they understand virtual reality that accommodates the female physiology? So there's that perspective. And I'm really excited to be able to back products that are going to make life better for half the population, that are designed for people first rather than kind of with a default male in mind. I think this has huge implications for female health, but also caregiving for our aging population. And then there's the idea that women are driving purchasing decisions beyond themselves as consumers, but they're buying, for the household. They're making decisions even on things that you would consider not like cars and finance. Like they're also driving short-term, medium-term decisions there. So the drive to choose responsibly, to purchase sustainable products or that want to do better, right, is something that we're excited to back through the fund. So these all have a gender lens in a different way, and gender lens itself in practice is kind of an evolving state. We obviously start with leadership, female-founded firms. But yeah, it's like a exciting space to be backing however we look at it, however we define gender lens. I think the last bit of it is really integrating gender lens in our investment process. So being aware of biases, working with an individual, being responsive, and of course having a diverse investment team. The studies speak for themselves in terms of what that correlates to, and not just correlates, but I think I've seen in practice, right, over the last few years as an angel investor in female founders, it's rare female founders really are excited about having a diverse investor base that can be supportive, that they feel an affinity with. And women investors tend to want to roll out their sleeves and ask how I can help in whatever way they can.
Yeah.
At least at the club, we've seen that. So women with a variety of expertise just want to weigh in and help and open their networks or give advice. So yeah, that would be a really exciting new paradigm.
Very quickly too, like if you could just give like a one sentence definition of gender lens, I guess how would you frame that?
I think it would be looking at the world or investing, if it's gender lens investing, that takes women into account.
Just wanted to throw that in there so that we have readers understand it fully.
My totally non-academic definition.
No, but it's good. It's like on the top of your mind, like what it would mean to you. So thanks for that. So my last question, with all the work that you're doing and all the great impact that you are having through your initiatives, where do you hope to see the VC world heading towards as there are more women entrepreneurs and investors? Ideally, what does that look like to you?
Well, I'm excited about that because I think that means broader perspectives and selecting the businesses that are going to be shaping our future. Funding is kind of one of the tools to supercharge the company, right? And broaden their reach, help them create better products or technology. And what's that in service of? I want to think of VC as way beyond making a few people rich, but really forwarding humanity. These are like the cutting edge innovations that are going to change our lives, how we work and how we live. So I will attest that this is probably more idealistic than why most people go into VC. Yeah. But I would say I'd love to see the world kind of have a shift, not just in terms of representation and having female bodies in seats and female bodies at the table, but a mindset shift, right? A world that recognizes that we are far below our potential if we don't include diverse perspectives. And that's life that's better for both women and men. So yeah, thinking about sort of everyone winning, and that shows up not just having women entrepreneurs and VCs, but also how we would evaluate our investments to take into account both the easily quantified and the not so easily quantified.
Great. Thank you for your answer. And yeah, I think eventually one day when people think of like investor, it's not just like, a man, right? It's like, it could be a man or a woman. So I think it's great to see this space fill up more and more with women entrepreneurs and investors. So thank you again for your time. I think it's been such a great conversation. I appreciate all the wisdom that you've embarked on us. So thank you so much, Gail.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity to share.